Hello, this is Now Tell Us, and I'm your host, Anthony Moirore. And I have a question for you. Are you a public speaker? Or do you have some interest in public speaking? And if you do, you are at the right place. Whether you get to listen to this one as we are doing it live, or when you come to watch it after we are through, or listen on the podcast platforms that we have. And we are very blessed today to have one great guest with us who is going to tell us much more about public speaking, the art of public speaking, and the business of public speaking. And I'm not going to take one more minute. I'm just going to introduce our guest today to the show because he's the one to tell us everything. I know he's great because I have been following him, but let's find out together. Our guest today is known as Grant Baldwin. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Hey, Anthony. Thanks for letting me hang out with you, man. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's such an honor to have you on our episode today. And I've been following you for quite some time. I've listened to your podcast. I'm excited that your podcast is over 400 episodes right now
Yeah.
and still growing, and you haven't stopped. And you've been on the show or on the business of public speaking for more than 15 years.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. So you are the right person to have on this show, telling us about the art and the business of public speaking. But before we get right into it, we would like to know a bit more than what I have just introduced you as. Maybe where you were born, how you've grown.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the most important things in my world is I'm married to my high school sweetheart.
Oh,
We started dating when I was 15. She was 17. We've been together for over 25 years. Just celebrated 20 years of marriage, and we got three beautiful daughters. So it's me and a house full of women. So that's the most important stuff. So way more important than any of the speaking stuff we're going to talk about today. I love what I get to do as a speaker, as an entrepreneur. But my most important roles are being a husband and a father. So yeah, I've been, like you mentioned, I've been in the speaking industry for the majority of my career. And first as a full-time professional speaker, I was doing about 60, 70 gigs a year, and then kind of evolved into coaching and working and training speakers. And there's some people who want to be full-time speakers and some that want to do a few gigs on the side and just wondering, how do I find those gigs and how much do I charge and what do I speak about and how does this world work? And that's where I was when I got started. And so that's the speakers that we work with today.
that's beautiful, quite beautiful. And where are you based?
I'm in just outside Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, wonderful. That's in the US
Yep.
because we are international. Some of us would like to know exactly where, but that's not your only area of working. You're international and you're reaching out to people who are in public speaking. And I know that you've helped thousands and thousands, and you list of having touched 49 nations worldwide. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, we've worked with speakers in every U.S. state, all 50 U.S. states, and then 49 different countries around the world. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the fun things about speaking is, there are people literally all over the world, all different ages and stages of life, all different industries and topics that people are interested in, all different audiences that people want to speak to. So, speaking is very much a universal thing. And so, and I think especially now with virtual speaking, that wasn't really a thing prior to COVID, but when COVID hit, virtual becomes kind of the only option in town. And so it's created a lot of international opportunities virtually that didn't previously exist. And so, yeah, there are just enormous opportunities right now for speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting us know that because some of us don't have a clue what if maybe if I am this young or this old, whether I'm able to be a public speaker. How does one get started? Because you'd say anybody could be a public speaker, but how
Yeah.
exactly does one get started into public speaking?
Yeah, so our training company is called the Speaker Lab, and at the Speaker
Mhm.
Lab, we teach a five-step process that we call the Speaker Success Roadmap, and it makes the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK. And so, maybe it'd be helpful if I just walk through that real quick, and then we can kind of dig in and go from wherever you want from there. But the first part of the process, S, is select a problem to solve. Select a problem to solve, and this comes down to two key questions that every speaker has to answer and be really clear on. Number one is who do you speak to, and number two is what problem do you solve for that audience. Now, the important part here is you want to be as specific and clear as possible. The dangerous thing and the mistake that a lot of speakers make is we feel like we need to spread the net as far and wide as possible. So we think about like, okay, well, who do I speak to? Well, I speak to people, I speak to humans. My message is for everybody. But if it's for everybody, it's really for nobody. So you got to be really, really clear on who you're speaking to. And the second part of the equation there is what problem do you solve for that audience? And so oftentimes whenever I ask speakers, hey, what do you speak about? Sometimes they'll say, well, what do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything. I can speak about, podcasting or speaking or business or family or marriage or faith or on the list goes. And the reality is like you can't be an expert about all those things. And so the way we talk about it with speakers is you want to be a steakhouse and not a buffet, a steakhouse and not a buffet. And what we mean by that is, Anthony, if you and I were looking for a good steak, like we have a choice, we could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 different things that they offer and they're all mediocre. Or you could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really, really well. So they don't do pasta, they don't do seafood, they don't do cupcakes, like they do steak, and that is it. And again, it's counterintuitive, but again, the more clear, the more specific, the more narrow, the more focused you are as a speaker, the easier it is to find and attract the right type of gigs that would be a good fit for you. And so if you get this part right, and I'm not saying it's easy, but if you get that part right, then everything else we're going to talk about here in that speak framework becomes a lot simpler. So that's the S, selecting a problem to solve. The P is then prepare your talk. Be really, really clear on what is the solution that you are providing to that problem. And so this is where you could present in the form of a workshop or a keynote or a breakout or virtual or in person or a seminar or training or consulting. There's a lot of different things that you could do here in terms of how you're going to provide a solution to the problem that you're solving. Next part of the process is the E, establish yourself as the expert. Establish yourself as the expert. So there's two key marketing tools and assets that you need. Number one is you need a website, and number two is a demo video, website and demo video. So in this day and age, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. It is really hard for people to take you seriously. So you have to have a website. And then it's important to have a demo video. Now, what exactly is a demo video? Now, think of it like a movie trailer. They take like a 90-minute or a 2-hour movie and they boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes. And within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of who's in it, what's the plot, what's the theme. And the goal of the movie trailer and the goal of the demo video is to make you want to see more. And so that's exactly what you're trying to do with that demo video, is to give people kind of a little taste of, hey, if we were to work together, if I was to come speak to your audience, this is what it would be like. And so that demo video is supposed to just give them a little bit there before they would decide on hiring you. Next part of the process is acquire paid speaking gigs. And so when we talk about this, again, this is the part that oftentimes people want to fast forward to. But you have to have these previous pieces in place first, being clear on who you speak to, being clear on what the solution is that you're providing, being clear on having your marketing assets in place that communicate who you are and what it is that you do to potential decision makers and event planners. And then whenever it comes to acquiring paid speaking gigs, this is so much more than just kind of like, okay, I have my website, I have my demo video. Now I sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. Like that doesn't work. We want to be proactive, not reactive, in terms of reaching out to event planners and decision makers, having a system in place for reaching out, but also being able to follow up and staying top of mind whenever they're ready to make a decision about hiring a speaker. And then the last part of the process, K, is know when to scale. And what we mean by this is a lot of people who are interested in speaking are also interested in writing a book or coaching or consulting or doing a podcast or doing a YouTube channel or doing any number of things. And so we always say, like, you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things at once. Something's going to come first, something's going to come last. So you got to be really clear about how speaking kind of fits into the mix of what it is that you want to do. So we touched on this earlier, but there are speakers that I know and that we work with who do 100 gigs a year, and that's fine. And speakers that do 5 gigs a year, and that's also fine. So it's not that one's better or worse than the other, but you got to be clear for you and what it is that you're trying to accomplish, how speaking kind of fits into the mix. So again, that's kind of just the big picture, the high level overview of that speak framework, the SPEAK.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. And for the one who's listening out there, you've got that broken down in the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK, and K. So we really appreciate you introducing us to that. Now, there's someone who wants to speak for the very first time, but we know that getting up there, holding the mic, standing on the stage is not an easy thing.
Yep.
How do you just break that one day of being up there in front of an audience confidently and giving a wonderful speech?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple things I would suggest. One is to remember that everybody starts from zero, meaning that I think it's easy sometimes to look at anyone who's really, really good at speaking or really anything and just assume like, well, they got up from day one and they've just always been great at this thing. And that's not the reality. Like any type of skill that anyone has, whether that's writing or singing or music or speaking or podcasting or a sport or whatever, like there may be a certain amount of athletic ability or natural talent that they may have, but it's also they're good because they spend a lot of time working on their craft. So some of that is to like take some pressure off of feeling like from day one you have to be as good as some other professional speaker. Like that's not realistic. That's not fair to
Mm-hmm.
you at all. So take some of that pressure off. One of the best, simplest things to do for any speaker is to really take the time to practice and prepare. I think a big misconception is people assume that the best speakers in the world are speakers that just kind of, again, they're great at it. And so they just scribble some ideas on a napkin and they hop up on stage and just kind of wing it and it all just works out. Like that doesn't work. Like they really spend a lot of time behind the scenes practicing, rehearsing, going over their talk time and time and time again, so that by the time they get up on stage, they're a lot more comfortable and prepared because they've done the work. And again, this isn't exclusive to just speakers. This is any type of industry. If you look at like a professional athlete and you watch them and you think, wow, they're just amazing at what it is that they do on the field or on the court or whatever the sport is that they play. But really, they spend so much time behind the scenes just practicing and practicing and practicing, just going over drills and plays and just over and over and over and over again so that they become really, really good at what it is that they do. And it makes it look effortless. But the truth is they've spent a ton of time practicing behind the scenes. And so that's the case with speakers as well, is any speaker can really spend the time to practice, go over it, prepare, so that by the time you get ready to speak, you are a lot more ready and a lot more confident and not just like you're not just winging it.
Beautiful. And talking about scribbling something on a napkin, I want to ask you this question because I've had people ask once in a while, what is it to read about reading your speech from a paper or from a note that you've written all your speech and someone who speaks all the way, all through the speech from the mind? I mean,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, I would recommend that you use notes as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is oftentimes, and I get that's a very intimidating thing. It's a very daunting thing. But I think the more that you are glued to your notes, for example, if like right now we're talking and every time you ask me something, I was like, hang on, I got an answer for that. Okay. So da, 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 da. Like the more I'm doing that, the less engaging I'm going to be and the less you're going to be paying attention because I'm just reading something off of a piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you need like a note card or something, just kind of like reference like what comes next, or a story or something, that's one thing. But just to like read something off of a piece of paper, I think that that's very disengaging for an audience, and it's just not super compelling. So really, again, the best speakers, they are spending so much time practicing and preparing behind the scenes, and part of that is knowing, okay, I tell this, and then I tell this story, and then I transition to this, and they're practicing and working it through so they know what's coming next. And again, that's not easy, and I'm not saying that's just an overnight process, but it is absolutely something that can be done. So can you use a note card? Sure, but I would use it as little as possible to make sure that you stay engaged with the audience.
And you've made a very significant example there when you turn the page and it makes noise
Yeah.
everywhere. And,
Yep.
and I came into this thought just as you are presenting that. Now, this is one of the reasons of getting someone who's giving you feedback, someone that you can talk
Yeah.
to. And now that technology is here, and you say that it brought businesses that you never thought about before the COVID era, and now whoever you is listening to these, maybe from another part of the world, from Africa, Europe, or wherever they are, you can use this medium to practice your speech. You can have a
Sure.
coach like Grant. He's here and he's going to tell you how you're doing because feedback is important. Talk about feedback for some minutes, please.
Yeah, we within the Speaker Lab, we have a couple different training programs where we work with speakers and kind of walk alongside them in their journey as they build and grow their speaking business and help them to accomplish their speaking goals. And to your point there, Anthony, one of the things we always say is it's really hard to read the label from inside the jar. And
Mhm.
so sometimes we're this close to our own business or to our own speech, and we're going, I'm missing something or something's off, and I don't know what it is. And sometimes it's super helpful to have that outside perspective to kind of look at it and say, hey, here's what you need to do next, or here, let us help you with this. And that's a big part of what coaching and training is, which is what we do with our students, is kind of help them understand, like, hey, here's the path, let us kind of guide you and show you, here's the thing. No, that, like, that's a distraction, that's not going to make any sense, that doesn't work to go that way, go this way, like this is the way that works. And so it helps to have that kind of proven process that we guide and walk our students through, and to get that coaching that they get alongside, where we come alongside them and help them.
Yeah, I think it's similar to something that we used to do in the art class, where at the end of every class, every lesson, we would put our artworks at the back of the class, and we'll walk to the front of the class, and everybody will talk about the art that is there. And sometimes it wasn't so interesting what some people said. Some
Yeah.
students would laugh at the work that you've done, but it really helped. I mean, when you're doing your work and you know there's someone at the end of the day who is going to look at your work and laugh at it, someone comment negatively about it, you're going
Yeah.
to be more serious when you're doing your work, and you're going to get that feedback positively. However negative it may be, you're going to draw something positive from that comment. And in the public training, in the coaching, you're not going to be laughed at. You're going to be shown the way to move
Yeah.
ahead effectively.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely. And like we touched on earlier, I think it's just important to remember, like, everybody starts from zero. And so,
yeah.
whenever you are practicing, and you are getting that feedback, like the feedback that our coaches provide, like, we want you to be better, right?
Mhm.
And so, if you're working on something, then, like, a story doesn't make sense, or it doesn't really fit, or maybe it's supposed to be funny and it's just not as funny as you think it is, and so it's a chance for us to give some feedback or maybe help, maybe some different lines or something to make it a little bit funnier. It adds to that talk and that presentation, and gives them some more confidence versus them, a speaker going out on stage and presenting, and it doesn't work. We'd rather figure it out behind the scenes, so that by the time you get up and present again, you're a lot more comfortable and confident because the material works.
Mm. And having or looking at your journey in the speaking industry, you've made speeches, you've been to places, you've made it to millions or seven figures in the speaking industry now. And some of us who are listening are just in the starting position. How do I know how I'm going, or what I'm going to charge my speech, the speech that I give at first, or the speech that I will give at every other level as I'm climbing up? How do I know this?
Yeah, as far as your speaking fees, yeah, you're right that it can vary significantly, and there's a couple different variables. Before I give you kind of a long answer, let me give you a short answer first. One is, we actually have a free speaking fee calculator, and so we put this together recently because we get people who ask all the time, like, "Hey, how much should I charge as a speaker?" And the answer, honestly, is it depends.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of variables and factors that go into it. Well, it depends is a horrible answer, and so what I'd recommend is people go to myspeakerfee.com, myspeakerfee.com, all put together there. And if you do that, there you can answer a couple of multiple choice questions, and it'll spit out a number for you of what you should be charging as a speaker. And so literally, I talked to one of our coaches just in the past day or two, and they said, "Hey, tell me again what that link is." I told them myspeakerfee.com. They sent it to a student that we work with. The student, again, it's totally free, but anybody can use it. The student went through that, and the fee that they came back with was $5,000. They said they went and quoted it to this event planner, and the event planner booked them for $5,000. So we know that it works. So again, I'd highly recommend that, myspeakerfee.com. Now, let's talk about some of the different variables that go into that. One is going to be your industry. You can
Mhm.
charge more in some industries versus others. You can charge more speaking to corporations than you could to nonprofits. Typically, you could charge more to colleges than you could to elementary schools. It's not that one's better or worse than the other. They each just kind of have their own different fee ranges that they're used to paying for speakers. So industry is going to be one. Another one's going to be your marketing assets. So we talked about earlier, like your website, your demo video. Whether we like it or not, people judge books by their covers. And so you want to make sure that your website, your demo video, they look sharp, they look professional. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to have spent tens of thousands of dollars on your site and your video, but you do want to make sure that they look sharp. And in fact, this is one thing inside of our different programs that we do is we actually make speaker demo videos for you. We make your website for you. And so in case you're wondering, like, I don't know what to put on my website, I don't know what to put my demo video, that's okay. We'll take care of that. We'll make sure it's done well, and it represents you well. And so having a good website, having a good demo video, like those things matter. Another important variable and factor is going to be your experience as a speaker. If you're just getting started as a speaker and you're brand new, you're probably not going to be able to charge as much as someone who's been doing this for 10 years and is probably just a better speaker than you are, right? And it doesn't mean you won't get there, but remember, everybody starts from zero, everybody starts from scratch. And so those would be a couple of variables and factors that go into it. So, but again, the shortcut answer I'd highly recommend is go to myspeakerfee.com.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. But could we have just a clue of an example of I'm going to a school? What are the ranges that people maybe start with? Yeah. Oh, and then you can tell us about the professionals that we know. What's the highest fee that you've ever had someone charge? Or
Yeah,
yes, maybe.
yeah, totally. And so, I mean, a lot of times most speakers are going to start anywhere from like $500 to $1,000. Normally, a couple $1,000s for most speakers early on is going to be realistic and reasonable. Again, kind of depending on some of these variables that we talked about earlier. For speakers who've been at it for a few years, depending on the industry, maybe 5 to 10,000. Speakers who are typically full-time speakers who have a bit more experience are going to be anywhere from 10 to 20 to 25,000. But there are absolutely speakers who charge 25 to 50 to $100,000 per speech, and sometimes much higher. A big variable as the higher you go is the big variable is going to be your name recognition and kind of your celebrity factor that you bring to the table. And so when you look at it from the standpoint of an event planner who may be willing to pay $100,000 or a couple $100,000 to bring a speaker, there are absolutely going to be certain speakers in certain industries that by having that speaker come to their event, it's going to sell tickets. And so there's going to be a direct ROI on that. Now, that's not going to be you or I or most people listening or watching. But again, for most speakers, a couple $1,000s is certainly per speech is going to certainly be realistic early on in your speaking career.
Thank you very much for that, Grant. And talking of in-person speeches and now virtual that has been famous
Mm-hmm.
for the last few years, what is the difference in ranges of, asking for a fee? Do we now, because we are into the virtual world, charge less than we used to charge when we are in person?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think early on in the pandemic, it was kind of a wild, wild west where everyone was trying to just figure out, what do speaking fees look like for virtual speaking, and I think that they have largely settled on somewhere between 50 and 70% of what your normal in-person fee would be. And so let's say you normally would charge let's say $5,000 to speak in person. Well, for virtual, you could probably charge somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500, give or take, of your for a virtual speaking engagement. Now, there's pros and cons with both of them. The nature of in person is you have to get on a plane. Typically, you have to leave your family, you have to go somewhere, but the in-person connection is going to be incredibly powerful. It's going to be way more impactful than what a virtual setting might be. The virtual thing, you may be able to do more gigs per day than what you could do because you're home, you're not going anywhere. So you may be able to do 2, 3, 4, 5 gigs in one day, and so maybe you're making a little bit less per gig, but you can do more gigs. And so there's an upside to that. The virtual is going to be a different element or different environment environment where, again, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to connect with an audience virtually than you could in person. So yeah, there's pros and cons. And again, I think one of the nice things is that you don't necessarily have to do all of one or all of the other. So there are a lot of speakers we work with that do a ton of virtual, and some speakers that we work with that don't do any virtual. And again, you kind of get to choose what makes sense for you and what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you for that. And if I may ask, how long would it take for someone who is new to this idea of public speaking to start from zero and become a paid speaker? Approximately, if you can tell us, if there is such a figure or such a time frame.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual for the students and clients that we work with to go from I've never been paid before, or maybe I've been paid a time or two, to booking their first paid gig, within 90 days. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. So a way I like to think about it is, if I were to ask, how long does it take to lose 10 pounds? If you wanted to lose 10 pounds, how long does that take? Well, the answer is it depends, but a lot of it depends on the energy and effort that person puts into it. And so for some people, I guess you could lose 10 pounds in, I don't know, a week. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but I guess hypothetically you could do it. For some people, it may take a month, could take several months. For some people, it might take a full year or a couple of years. And even then they might not make much progress, but a lot of it comes down to the work and the effort that person is willing to put into it. So we have speakers that we work with who who come right out of the gate, and within a few months they've booked several gigs at several $1,000s each and are generating significant revenue very, very quickly. But it's because they've come in, they've been coachable, they've been they want to do the work, and it's not just kind of like a hobby or a pastime or just kind of the side thing that they're doing, but they're really making the effort. They're really putting in a lot of work and hustle to see those results. So yeah, it's not unusual at all for speakers to get booked and paid to speak within their first 90 days within the program.
And talking of training and the different kinds of speakers that could be trained, do you just train anybody, or how do you go about knowing the people that you can work with?
Yeah, and so there, like we talked about earlier, there's the number of students that we've worked with. We've worked with thousands of different students at all different ages and stages, geographically, literally all over the world, a lot of different industries and topics. And so, yeah, regardless of where you're at in your speaking journey, if you've done some gigs before, if you've never done a gig, which is like I've always thought that would be fun or interesting, we would absolutely love to work with you. And we've probably worked with a speaker that's similar to where you're at.
Beautiful. And how do people get to you if they want to get training from you, get your coaching?
Yeah. Everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, and so you can learn more about the different programs, the different opportunities that we have there. You mentioned we've got a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab Podcast. We've got over 400 episodes there. So if you listen to this podcast, you probably listen to other podcasts. So if you're interested in all in what we've covered today, definitely check out the Speaker Lab Podcast. We also got a book called The Successful Speaker. So 5 steps for getting paid, building your platform, and sharing your message. So I highly recommend that. It's basically that 5-step that speak framework we talked through earlier. It goes into that much more in depth. So definitely check out The Successful Speaker. So a lot of different ways that, again, if you want the coaching and training with what it is that we do, you can definitely do that. It's a big investment, but we work with a lot of speakers and help them with that. It's the best way to get results. But absolutely, you can listen to the podcast for free or check out the book for a couple of bucks, and that will also give you the plan and the roadmap that you need to find and book paid speaking gigs.
Beautiful, and thank you very much, Grant. So for those of you who may have joined us in the middle, we are talking with Grant Baldwin, who's been a very great person in the speaking industry with a podcast that has been helping thousands and thousands of people. I've listened to very many of the programs, of the episodes, and they are really beautiful. You should go there and subscribe to the podcast. Listen to as many episodes that you can get to listen to. You'll not only get to know about the art of speaking, you'll get the business of speaking ideas, and you'll live there an inspired person. So head over to www.thespeakerlab.com and connect with Grant Baldwin, and you won't regret it. I assure you. This is Now Tell Us, and we love to listen. We have been listening all through. And we are just about to sign off. But before we go, we would like to hear some words from our guests, as always, that we will always remember. And this is Grant's time. It's your field, Grant.
Yeah, I think a big kind of overarching thing I'd say to kind of wrap us up here is everything we covered and talked about is simple, but it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. It still requires work. It still requires discipline and effort. And so, just listening to this podcast and the discussion that we've had, or just listening to the Speak Aloud podcast, or checking out the Successful Speaker book, like all that's well and good, but you have to put effort. You have to actually show up and do the work. So it's simple, but it's not easy. So you can do this, but you gotta be willing to put the work into it.
Oh, yeah, sure. So you've got to invest some time in it. You've got to invest your energy and also invest some finances in getting yourself trained in the industry. And the best person to do that is definitely Grant Baldwin. So that's it for now for today's episode. I've been your host, Anthony Mwerore, and together with Grant Baldwin, we are saying bye for now. Bye bye.
See ya.